Greetings and salutations to you all. Welcome everyone to my latest video on the Battle for Azeroth. Now, given the loads of information that we were provided with at BlizzCon, we know that Blizzard really liked the character development and story that they did with Illidan Stormrage throughout the expansion. And they would like to carry that over to the main characters of Battle for Azeroth. Those main characters at this given time are King Anduin Wrynn, Lady Jaina Proudmoore, Thrall, Vol'jin, and Sylvanas Windrunner. Now, that isn't to say they won't focus on characters like Saurfang or Gen Greymane, but the main focus seems will be on those 5 for the time being. We'll be speculating on just what they'll be up to throughout the expansion. Please note that this is a speculation, and more than likely, many of these things will not come to pass. This is just me theorizing. Let's go ahead and get into detail on who these characters' pasts are, and what they might be up to in Battle for Azeroth. Now, before I say anything else, I am a Horde player primarily, even if I do play Alliance at times. So if I say anything that sounds off or odd regarding an Alliance hero, I apologize, as I do know my Horde stuff a lot better. Anyways, with all that said, let's begin, shall we? I'll be starting with Lady Jaina Proudmoore. Now, Jaina's been on a rather roller coaster ride as of late, but we'll talk about that shortly. For now, I'll give you guys a bit of her past. Starting all the way back to Warcraft 3, she was a sorceress trained under Archmage Antonidas, best friends and lovers with Arthas Menethil, and daughter of Daelin Proudmoore, who was the ruler of Kol Tiras. Now, Jaina, even back then, had to deal with a lot of loss and trying times. The land she called home was turned to a paradise of undeath by her former lover, Arthas, who'd later become the king of the very undead they fought against, who also killed her teacher, Antonidas. The prophet and former guardian of Tirisfal, Medivh, would warn Jaina and tell her to go to the land of Kalimdor. She would lead those who survived the devastation of Lordaeron to the land of Kalimdor, and it was here that she would be met with the mighty Horde, led by Warchief Thrall. Initially, the Horde and the survivors of Lordaeron battled with one another, but with push and prodding from Medivh, the sorceress gave in, and even would become friends with Thrall, and together with the help of the Night Elves, the Horde and the survivors of Lordaeron banded together and stopped the Legion. Jaina would settle with the survivors into a land she'd call Theramore, and there she would find peace. Though peace doesn't last very long, her father, Daelin Proudmoore, shows up, and attacks the Horde in their new home in Durotar, and ignites conflict between both sides. Ultimately, Jaina is forced to choose between the Horde and her nation, and she chose the side of peace back then. She chose the Horde over her own father, and ultimately the Horde, with no alternative, put down the Mad King of Kol Tiras. Nowadays, Jaina's just about lost everything. Arthas, who became the Lich King, is now dead. Her home of Theramore was nuked by Garrosh Hellscream. Many of her friends, family, and the very peace she had with Horde are now gone. She is a broken woman with so many things taken from her. The last time we saw Lady Jaina, she was bitter and angry over the Council of Dalaran to allow the Horde back into the city. Her bitterness for the Horde had grown in abundance after Garrosh's actions. She left Dalaran and went off to somewhere else. The question that we all are probably asking ourselves is where? Now, we can finally speculate on where she went and what she might be up to, given the hints and clues from BlizzCon. Now, there's a number of places our Jaina could have gone to, but the most likely candidate is she went off to Kol Tiras to reunite with her family and home. But I personally think she's not gone to Kol Tiras quite yet. We will, however, have her join us later on, I think. She'll definitely be integral to the Alliance's story in Kol Tiras, especially since her mother is one of the rulers there, but I think she's extremely reluctant on going to her homeland after what she did to them. Personally, I think our friend Jaina went to Stromgarde and restored it to its former glory with her magics and influence, as we do see her in the cinematic supposedly on top of Stromgarde, watching as the two forces clash in Arathi Highlands. Could be another reason as to why the Alliance are successful in bringing down Lordaeron so easily with the reinforcements of Stromgarde provided by Jaina. Either way, I think Jaina will return to her home in Kol Tiras and deal with the repercussions of her actions of letting their king be killed by Rexxar and the rest of the Horde. A lot of regret will follow her around and where she goes, and I think this will be her story of figuring out who exactly she is and what path she will be on. I personally think Jaina might return to her roots, but with the knowledge she learned from Garrosh. But perhaps they'll take her story in another way. I highly doubt they're going to take the character in an antagonistic role, but I'm not sure if they're going to restore her fully to what she once was, probably midway between peaceful and aggressive. I really look forward to the relationship between Jaina and her mother. Definitely think that her mother is not happy with her daughter, and we'll see if their relationship will be forever crumbled, or able to be restored. Maybe she'll be happy to see her daughter again. Hard to honestly say as of right now. Onto our next hero, we have Anduin Wrynn, recently made the king of the Alliance after the demise of his father on the Broken Shore, to alternate Gul'dan. Now, Anduin is a very interesting character, in this case, as he has been through so much at such a young age, and has shown both his maturity and inexperience a lot of times. But he's always been for peace between the Alliance and the Horde. A lot of people view him as very weak and not a very reliable leader, even his own people. He's been with us since Classic, and was the leader of the Alliance for a time, though it was mostly Bolvar. When Varian Wrynn, his father, went missing, it was down to him and Bolvar, well, and Onyxia, but she wasn't ruling very long to lead the Alliance. Later down the line, he was reunited with his father, though Varian was vastly different and far more for war than ever before. His practical uncle, Bolvar, was sent out to war, and ultimately he lost his life in the land of the Cold North, though he was never told of Bolvar's true fate, as to not break Anduin further, at such a young age.
Tell them only that the Lich King is dead, and that Bolvar Dragon died with him.
During the Cataclysm, it was thanks to Anduin that Moira's life was spared, and resulted in the formation of the Council of Three Hammers. He and the hero of the Alliance also investigated the Twilight's Hammer's activity in Stormwind itself, and he proved his own capabilities in discovering a plot that could have nearly destroyed Stormwind. He learned for himself the costs of his actions and peace during Mist of Pandaria, and got way more experience than he ever would have in Stormwind. Anduin learned a lot in Pandaria, and even managed to teach his father a thing or two. He's far more wiser than given credit for, but is still learning. He had a lot of courage when confronting Garrosh, who was the current Warchief at the time. Anduin stopped him from using the Divine Bell, but ultimately was nearly killed in doing so. It wasn't the smartest of choices he made, but it was a very brave choice. I believe it was Anduin's doing that Varian did not disband the Horde when Garrosh's reign ended as Warchief. So thanks a lot, Anduin, though Wrathion was not very happy with that decision. In Legion, Anduin lost his father, whom he depended on and loved. It's always heavy on the child when the parent is lost, and more than that, he was also put into the position of king of the entire Alliance. The people blame for his father's death was not on the Legion, but the Horde. Although those within his council advised that the focus should be on the Legion and not the Horde, excluding Gen and, well, Jaina. Despite Anduin's confidence in peace, he was deeply troubled by the loss of his father and how it happened. It would take time, but Anduin eventually visited the very site that Varian's life was lost, and it was at this moment that he understood what he had to do, by reminiscing on his father's words, and would take up his father's sword and lead his people. During the Battle for Azeroth cinematic, we see a glimpse on what is happening with Anduin as king. Finally, we see him take his first actual step into a battlefield against the Horde. And at his side is Genn Greymane, who he has seen as a godfather of sorts with Varian's passing. And I am certain that Genn feels the same way, as he lost a son not so long ago. I believe Genn is definitely a big influence as to why our regularly peaceful Anduin is warring with the Horde, but since Teldrassil also was burned down prior to this engagement, though that's according to an article, I am sure Malfurion and Tyrande are also on board with engaging the Horde after their transgression, likely telling Anduin that this cannot be just ignored. So I think that Anduin is almost forced to step up to the plate as king and wage war against the Horde for their actions, even if he doesn't want to. Now, Anduin really isn't a fighter, and he is still new at being a leader. So I think this expansion will test in Anduin's limits and show us his side of things. We'll definitely be seeing him more heal than raise a sword, but I won't be surprised if we see him raise that sword now and then. He's an alright archer and okay with a throwing dagger too, but I'd love to see Turalyon teach Anduin in the ways of the sword, even if Anduin himself is more of a priest than a paladin. Anduin is still very much a learner, and I'm really hoping it'll be he who discovers that the Horde is not fully to blame. But at the same time, it's important that Anduin understands the cost of peace, and while the whole Horde are by no means bad, there are those who abuse peace for their own gains. I think Anduin's arc will have him grow into his crown further, and understanding that peace cannot just be obtained through words alone, but actions will be necessary. I also think that Anduin will learn to trust his own words and not rely singly on Genn or Velen. He definitely needs to gain his own voice and not let others decide things solely for him. I also think we will see a point where Anduin tries to confront one of the leaders of the Horde and try to work around peace. I could definitely see someone like Bane or possibly Thrall. I really want to see that friendship between Bane and Anduin be shown in the actual game, rather than just in the books. As a side note, I also think that Wrathion might also be pushing for this war, as we do see him, according to Redshirt Guy, with the Alliance leaders, which is awfully suspicious. But this will be Anduin's time to shine, and gain some serious grit finally. I don't think we've seen the last of his spark for peace from him, but this will be his time to understand war, and to take action from his usual peaceful demeanor. Definitely think he'll question his actions at times, but ultimately will become a better king after this. So we'll see that war side of Anduin at the start, but in time I think Anduin, similar to Jaina, will find himself, and what he needs to do for not just the Alliance's sake, but for Azeroth and the Horde's sake as well. Perhaps he might even finally settle the long disputes between the Alliance and the Horde for good. Time will tell. Next, one of the main heroes for the Battle for Azeroth is the rather recently made Warchief of the Horde, Sylvanas, who had recently obtained the position as the final words from the former Warchief, Vol'jin. Now once again we have ourselves a very interesting character on our hands here, in possession of leadership of the Horde, though this time it's not because she is for peace. Sylvanas Windrunner is the middle child of the three Windrunner sisters. In life, she was Ranger General of Silvermoon, who had hatred for the orcs, just like most of her people. She was a very skilled general, who even managed to outwit Arthas and his scourge from time to time. However, her skill in battle and intelligence did not spare her from death, or the cursed life of someone brought back from the dead and raised as a banshee. Sylvanas for a time did serve Arthas and Ner'zhul, but with time and patience, she managed to free herself, and strike out against the one who had damned her. Initially, she was of course disgusted by her new form, and who wouldn't be? But she chose her new life as a means of getting vengeance on Arthas and his scourge. the Dark Lady would manage to free those who shared in this curse, and proclaimed them as Forsaken. With her new people united and their goal in mind, Sylvanas would use the capital of Lordaeron as her new home, and seek out a people that could help gain a foothold against Arthas and the Scourge. Ultimately, she would find that foothold by joining the Horde, a faction she was originally filled with hatred over, but they would be of service to her, not the other way around. In due time, Sylvanas did get her vengeance on Arthas, and when that was all settled, she no longer needed the Forsaken or the Horde. Her goal was achieved, and she could at long last rest in peace. But the fate that waited for her beyond death after she committed suicide was one that she could not accept. And through her Valkyr, she would continue to live and continue her people. Her new goal was to live on no matter what. Now, Sylvanas has always been viewed in a very darker light than most other characters. She has done some pretty questionable things in order for her goals to become a reality, but she has a side of her that does care for her people and her Forsaken. But she's never really showed much concern for the Horde. This is where Legion and the battle for Azeroth kicked in. When Vol'jin was dying, he asked Sylvanas to get the Horde out of the broken shore, and not let them die this day. She was even reluctant to, knowing full well that the Alliance would not forgive them for retreating, but it was necessary for the Horde's survival. Sylvanas called upon her Valkyr, which was very risky as the demons could have killed the angelic beings and have the Banshee Queen and her people exposed. But she got the Horde out of there, and as Vol'jin laid on his deathbed, he would make Sylvanas the current Warchief of the Horde, as his last act, as it was what the lowest spirits wanted. She needed to step out of the shadows and become the Warchief of the Horde that the Horde needed. She gave a very encouraging speech that rallied the Horde, even then, to strike back against Vol'jin's murderers, and I personally believe the words were very genuine. Now, she was selfish by going for the Valkyr goddess a year, but it was for her people and herself, and by extension, it was for the Horde. Nevertheless, it mayhaps been not the best of ideas, especially when Gan Greymane was hunting her down and wishing for her blood. And as we learned from the book, Sylvanas respected Vol'jin in a manner or way as a leader, but in no way was she happy with her new title, as it prevented her from the things she wanted to do and where she wanted to go. And Saurfang, leader of the Orcs, would be very watchful and keen on making sure she would not turn out as Garrosh did. Now, I'm going to heavily admit I am grateful for Blizzard's decision to push Sylvanas into a proper warchief and leader, rather than doing the obvious, turning her into an antagonist for both sides to face. It'd be way too similar to Garrosh. In the cinematic, we see an almost sad-looking Sylvanas Windrunner during the siege of her city by the Alliance. And by the end of the same cinematic, we see that Sylvanas screams the most genuine for the Horde from her that I've ever heard, and it rallies the Horde in its entirety against the Alliance. This is the path I think Sylvanas will be taking. She will be stepping out from the shadows, and she will learn that her actions have consequences, but she will also learn that the Horde isn't just about her, or just about the Forsaken, but the Horde is everyone, and that it needs to be a family that supports one another. I believe that Sylvanas will successfully unite the Horde again, and make it stronger than ever before, and we will see a proper warchief just like we saw in Vol'jin and Thrall, and even parts of Garrosh. One thing that is heavily pointed out in the cinematic is the lack of Forsaken people in the battle, excluding the archers firing with her on top of the capital's wall. I think that it's possible that Sylvanas' people perhaps have lost faith in her, and are drifting away. Though of course there are those still with her. I think it would be very interesting if Sylvanas saw the very people she treated extremely well abandon her in her hour of need, and in their stead the Horde took her their place. I think it would really reinforce the idea that the Horde is there for their warchief, and that she can depend on them. And it would also go a lot in hand with the whole Desolate Council that are possibly behind Teldrassil, and it could be the ones who convinced some of the Forsaken to leave Sylvanas to her fate. we will see Sylvanas actually change, I think, into not just a better leader, but also a better person as well. I am really looking forward to seeing her character grow and develop, and I'm really looking forward to see those interactions between her and Varrock Saurfang. Next up, we have our former Warchief of the Horde and former leader of the Earthen Ring, Thrall, or to some Goel. But let's be honest here, nobody really calls him that but Agra. Now, I want to take a moment to actually applaud Blizzard for making probably the riskiest move yet by making Thrall a prominent character again, despite all the hatreds towards him. I understand he's done a few things that people aren't happy about, but man, am I looking forward to seeing just what they might show with his story. Anyways, Thrall was the orc who built the foundations of the current Horde. Once he had been a slave to humans, now he is one of the most well-regarded orcs throughout history. He saved the Darkspears, the Tauren, and permitted both the Forsaken and Blood Elves into the Horde. He also kinda pushed the Goblins towards the Horde too, after they saved him. He had been someone who strived for peace, but was not afraid to settle things in a fight if they were needed. He was never too peaceful and never too violent. He was right in between for me. And while he's not made the best choices for the Horde in the past, he did make a grand home for the Horde and its people, and arguably has been one of the greatest warchiefs for the Horde. But the world and Parenthood needed our favorite orc shaman, and he would be away from the Horde for quite some time. From dealing with an oversized jawlined dragon, to dealing with the joys of being a father. But with the rise and fall of Garrosh, Thrall would return to the Horde to support his friends and family. One of his final acts as a leader of the Horde was making Vol'jin the newly appointed Warchief, and was glad to follow him. Thrall blamed a lot with what happened with the Horde on himself, even if it wasn't true. But even if it was or wasn't true, he would correct the mistake and end Garrosh and Mak'gora later, after Garrosh escaped. Now, Thrall is troubled by his actions, and the elements are not so happy with his decisions either. The Doomhammer itself, the weapon he had long wielded, became dead weight in his hands, and passed it to another who could. And he ventured off to discover what he could do, or what he should do. Now here's where I think Thrall's story will pick up from. We strangely did not see him attend Vol'jin's funeral, unless I missed him hiding somewhere. What I personally believe is that Thrall is out there somewhere with Vol'jin's urn. And yes, I know it was more painted as a joke, but I feel like there was some serious foreshadowing going on there. I think in one way or another, Thrall will help Vol'jin ascend to lowest status, or perhaps even bring him back from the dead. But that is definitely more of a short-term thing. What I think we'll see is Thrall return to his roots of being for the Horde, but also for peace. I'm hoping at long last we'll see the return of the true Thrall, the Thrall that we all know and love that wasn't too reliant on the elements, especially now. Now that they've gone silent on him, a Thrall that is more warrior-like in nature, who wears Doomplate in its entirety and wields the elements from time to time, I do think he'll ask for the Doomhammer back, as that is his iconic weapon, and without him, it just seems wrong. With the Horde warring with the Alliance at an all-time high, this is the time for both the return of Thrall and Vol'jin in some form or another. I think that we'll see Thrall having to choose between the Horde or peace, and that's going to be a hard decision for him to make in all of this, as he's been for peace a lot lately, but he's also been very supportive of the Horde that he built. As a side note, should Sylvanas or Saurfang bite the big one, I think that more than likely, Thrall will step up to the plate as either Warchief or leader of the Orcs. But I really wouldn't want either Saurfang or Sylvanas to fall. Now, Blizzard could make the faction war be more fueled if, say, someone killed Thrall, but that isn't what I would want personally, as Thrall is a last reminder of what the Horde once was, and if we lost him, that would have the Horde never forgive the Alliance. But again, it would be nice for story, I'd suppose. But personally, if you're new to this channel, we're a bit tired of the Horde losing its leaders. I really just want to see Thrall from his glory days, but with what he's learned over the years as well. It would be probably the best Thrall we'd ever seen, and it would also be nice to hear from Chris Metzen again, whom I greatly adore within Blizzard Entertainment. I would love for an encounter between Thrall and Jaina again, possibly trying to work out a means to igniting peace between their beloved factions. And lastly, we have Vol'jin of the Darkspear, former leader of the Darkspear Trolls and former Warchief of the Horde, and probably the strangest one on this list, considering he's dead. As mentioned before with the mention of Thrall, we have the possibility of Vol'jin's return as a Law, or as a ghost. But let's first get into his backstory, and how he ended up the way he is now. Vol'jin was the son of Sen'jin, who was the original leader of the Darkspear tribe, before he was killed by Murlocs, who had been harassing the Darkspear tribe. It was thanks, however, to Warchief Thrall that Vol'jin and his brethren managed to both survive and escape the Murlocs, that were led by a Naga sea witch. It would take time, but eventually Vol'jin himself would return with the rest of his tribe, and he and his Darkspear would pledge themselves to Thrall and the Horde. During the same time that Daelin's people attacked, Vol'jin's tribe were forced to flee from their isles, while Rexxar, Rokan, and Shen took care of the human menace. They continued to serve the Horde beyond the Third War, along with the mighty Tauren and Undead. Vol'jin would serve as an advisor to Thrall not far from his side in Grommash Hold, within the city of Orgrimmar, that most of the Horde had called home. Vol'jin was not on the isles that he and his people had called home, due to someone he had once called friend, Zalazane, as Zalazane had taken the home selfishly for himself. It would take time, but eventually Vol'jin would lead the Darkspear and the Horde in retaking his home from Zalazane, and they would have their isles once again. Much later, after the Echo Isles were once theirs, the Cataclysm would occur, and Thrall named Garrosh the Warchief of the Horde, much to Vol'jin and Karen's disagreement. Vol'jin's voice would grow even louder against Garrosh when Karen was killed in a Mak'gora, which would lead to many insults and Vol'jin and most of his people's exilement from the city. Despite Vol'jin's displeasures with the Warchief and his methods, he would not put an arrow in the orc's heart yet. He would remain supportive of the Horde that he called his family, even to the point where he denied the Zandalari's offer of making the Troll Empire great again. Despite Garrosh's treatment to he and his people, Vol'jin warned both the Alliance and the Horde of the Zandalari's plans. Much later after the Cataclysm, during the time of Pandaria's campaign, Vol'jin never toned down his voice of disapproval for Garrosh, and it was for this that the Orc Warchief would have Vol'jin assassinated, though it was not successful. This drove the Horde further apart, and Vol'jin to plan a rebellion against the upstart Warchief. Hence the rebellion was born, and Vol'jin and his Darkspear would be leading it against Garrosh, along with those from both factions. This led to Vol'jin's ascension as Warchief and Garrosh's downfall. Yet sadly, Vol'jin's victory was bittersweet, as his time as Warchief would not be long as Garrosh's, or Thrall's, or even Sylvanas's. During the time of the Third Legion invasion, Vol'jin was stabbed, and he would not be able to recover, or fake his death this time. He chose to instead let someone else lead, and it would be the voice of the Loa that called out to him. And they called out,
Windrunner.
With his last dying words, Sylvanas would be Warchief of the Horde, and he would be set aflame. Now, Blizzard has teased before that Vol'jin's story wasn't done, and I am extremely happy that he isn't, cause his death was poorly executed, and honestly it felt like they just did it so it was even-steven between both the factions. Regardless of my salty thoughts on Vol'jin, I am glad that he is returning in some shape or form. Now, there's a lot to speculate on, but we do know he'll be returning not physically, but as a ghost from Ian and Jesse Cox's interview. I definitely think that he'll be with Thrall, and that he'll be guiding Thrall in how to revive him from the dead, perhaps how to connect him with Alola, possibly. I would really like it if Thrall has been carrying Vol'jin with him inside of his urn this entire time, rather than moping about, and trying to figure out a way to help Vol'jin out. It'd also be really neat if Vol'jin was speaking through Thrall somehow, kinda like possessing him from time to time. I'm sure Thrall wouldn't mind that, though Aggro would. Now, this can really go into three ways of Vol'jin's story. One way is that Thrall is actually trying to put Vol'jin's spirit at rest, and that Vol'jin's final words is that Thrall must protect the Horde, or something, before drifting off into peaceful troll heaven or whatever. Or wherever they go, after they ascend death. Second way is that Vol'jin actually ascends into his own Loa, which he obviously would support the Horde in its entirety, or at least the Dark Spears, and maybe the Zandalari, that they now serve the Horde. Third way, or final way, I see Vol'jin's story going is that Thrall helps Vol'jin get a new body, similar to Manokir did in Stranglethorn, or another way entirely, having our leader of the Darkspear back from the dead in the flesh. I would really prefer it if they returned Vol'jin from death itself, and he was alive again, and returned to leading the Darkspear tribe, as that would possibly give us 2 of our original Horde leaders returning to the Horde. However, at the same time, I wouldn't mind Vol'jin as a Loa, and Rokan as leader of the Darkspears, if they properly develop him. But I'm pretty alright with either or. Honestly, the weakest of these 3 is definitely just another send-off between us and Vol'jin. Definitely would prefer more of a Vol'jin is back and better than ever. But the Horde needs all sources of strength, leaders, and veterans it can get right now, against the Alliance. Now I can see many people saying that Vol'jin isn't capable of coming back after being lit aflame, or bringing him back would make his death meaningless. Now, for the first point, it is to my knowledge that Vol'jin is the first to be burned like that, so perhaps it'll have interesting results. Plus, Ian's already confirmed his physical form has been cut for now, but his spiritual form is still present, so maybe they just retcon that whole dealio. On to the second point, the whole deal of the battle for Azeroth stems from the conflicts blamed on Sylvanas, who Vol'jin made Warchief after he died. Whether that is truly on her or not doesn't matter. It's still something born from Sylvanas acting as Warchief, which is by extension Vol'jin's own death. So his death by no means is meaningless, and it did hurt the Horde in more ways than one. Now, I've said before in my earlier videos, if Vol'jin came back physically, I can't see him toddling over and asking Sylvanas for the position of Warchief back. He did that for a reason. The Loa asked him to do that for a reason, and I think he's going to stand by it, even if there's a chance the old gods were behind it. Which at this point I am still not really sure. But I highly doubt we're going to see Vol'jin lead yet another rebellion against the current Warchief. Although, I wouldn't be against the idea if Vol'jin became Warchief again. Honestly, bringing Vol'jin back is similar to bringing Illidan back for me. They can make it work because both of their deaths were handled poorly, and it works pretty well with the story. Resurrection happens not as often as people think in the lore, and Blizzard can do it extremely well at times. I'm just happy to see and hear Vol'jin again in some shape or form. I also would love a conversation between Sylvanas, Thrall, and Vol'jin, as they have all been Warchief at one point, and they could offer a lot of wisdom to Sylvanas and each other. But these have just been my thoughts, opinions, and speculation on what I think these characters will be up to. Do you have any thoughts on what these characters might be up to in Battle for Azeroth? Leave those comments on it down below. I plan on continuing my future thoughts and speculation on Battle for Azeroth till I've ran out of things to speculate on. But until then, my friends, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Ciao!